now coming up for our next session, which is the session hosted by Investor Hosting Center. Please help me welcome Mr. Philip Vekwa. He is going to take us through that next session and call up his panelists as well for what will be a very interesting conversation around how do we turn our investment potential into actual opportunities, and ultimately, how do we actually realize the value that comes with it. Please give him a round of applause.
Good morning, distinguished leaders. I'm honored to facilitate this session under the banner of the Investor Hosting Center, a platform built to bridge well-profiled global investors with bankable African opportunities through an end-to-end facilitation model that spans investor profiling, opportunity structuring, and hosting experiences from origination to closure. Our mantra, invest with confidence, achieve more, defines the dialogue as Africa repositions itself within the global economic matrix. Our shared mandate is to move beyond potential to transform opportunities into bankable, investable, executable, and scalable ventures. The theme, turning the continent's potential into bankable opportunities, is what we are going to focus on. Potential is not capital. Potential is just a debt you owe the future. Africa has a lot of potential because it has lots of unsolved problems, large-scale problems, like energy, infrastructure, and it is a big market, but a fragmented one. Africa is home to immense natural, human, and innovation potential, yet much of it remains undercapitalized. Today's conversations ask a vital question: how can we turn Africa's potential into bankable opportunities that drive inclusive growth? But investors don't finance potential. They finance cash flows. The cost of investing in Africa is higher than other continents. Check example of electricity, the electricity poverty talked yesterday, railway network, etc., etc. At IHC, we have received many questions from global investors. I'll give you an example. In agribusiness, one fund asked us, international global fund, they are looking for a continuous, uninterrupted 10,000 hectares with water, with rail, with electricity. They want to invest a minimum size of 100 million. They've got what it takes. They've got the off-taker market. They can consume that crop they gave us. We met with them. We verified, we profiled them. They've got proof of funding. They've got proof of the off-take. They've got everything. And when they come back to Zimbabwe, we could not get one continuous 10,000 hectare area we can put that. They asked us, we do not want to divert our attention to invest into a railway. We don't want to divert our attention or our funds into generating electricity. Therefore, they moved to Kenya, where they got such thing, 16,000 hectares, continuous with rail, everything. That's our issues which we find in Zimbabwe. To all of us, what makes something bankable on this continent? In your perspective, what does turning Africa's potential into bankable opportunities mean for your institution? Where do you see the strongest growth franchise emerging today? That's a question which we are giving everyone before I take my specific question to the panelists. I have divided our panelists into 3 categories. The first is local, national, which will be Mutapa Fund. Then the next one is regional. Oh, before I go, it's Mutapa Fund and our billionaire BRICS. They will attend to the national or the local questions which I will raise. Then the regional, I've dedicated my questions to AFREXIMBANK. Mr. Sachikonye will attend to that. And then our transnational or global, it has got 3. Okay, thank you. Let me come to Mutapa. Mr. Denhere, if we focus on the building national wealth systems and localized investment engines that fit into a future-ready Africa, Zimbabwe is recalibrating its economic future through sovereign wealth investments. From Mutapa's vantage point, how are we translating national assets into intergenerational wealth? That's first part of the question. The second part of the question, as a Zimbabwe Sovereign Wealth Fund, Mutapa balances commercial returns with developmental priorities. How do you identify and structure investment that deliver both? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for the questions, and good morning, everyone. Speaking as, obviously, Mutapa Investment Fund, where our core mandate as a sovereign wealth fund is definitely intergenerational. We're supposed to have a long-term investment horizon. So by default, it's looking to stimulate productivity in terms of broad-based GDP contribution of the assets under our portfolio. But I'll probably just take it back to where specifically Mutapa is. Initially, when it was formed in 2014, the idea was it was an investment-based fund where fiscal surpluses would be invested into, whether it's equity or debt type instruments into the market. That is typical of a number of sovereign wealth funds. If you're looking at Norway, where they then de-risk domestic markets by investing offshore, right? That didn't play out for Zimbabwe because the fiscal returns weren't just there, or the fiscal surpluses weren't there. So it was reimagined into an asset-based sovereign wealth fund. So where are we now? We're sitting with a portfolio of what were state-owned entities, which were in various forms of contribution, a lot of them requiring turnaround growth capital to actually transform. So what we've realized is, as Zimbabwe generally, and we are anchored by a mining portfolio, so our natural resource endowment is what we should be translating into sustainable industries into the future. And I think that's how we bridge what we have now into what can be intergenerational and sustainable. But to do that requires capital. So we leverage some of the assets that we have where we can raise the liquidity to deploy into defining the resources, because mining is capital intensive. You need exploration, you need to define the resource, and then you need to find strategic partners to operationalize those assets. But out of all of that, you need the infrastructure. You need mine to port strategies, because the revenue model on the mine is not going to work until you can export the product. So it's linked into mining, infrastructure, the enabling environment around that. And I think once we're able to turn that around, we can then say, okay, we've got the other industries, whether it's the telcos, the fintechs, the agro-industrial industries that can probably grow faster thereafter. And I think at that point we can say we're a sustainable sovereign wealth fund. So probably that's the first part of the question in terms of how do we bridge that gap.
Thank you. My follow-up question, how does Mutapa partner with private and regional investors to amplify impact?
We've been partnering a number of local institutional investors. We're developing some broad-based co-investment strategies with some institutional investors like NASA, Public Service Commission, amongst others. We've been tapping into relationships with AFREXIMBANK. We've unlocked facilities for ZESA. I think recently there was a $210 million facility we helped unlock for them to expand some of their transmission and distribution infrastructure. We're part of the African Sovereign Wealth Fund Forum. We've got relationships with a lot of the DFIs. But more importantly, through our portfolio itself, where there are existing business relationships with a number of regional, global counterparties, we've been able to raise significant amounts of debt. We can go into the oil sector, for example, where through the National Oil Infrastructure Company, their customers are your international traders like Trafigura, Glencore. They can access funds at SOFR plus 4%, which we can't access in our local markets. So it's leveraging our relationships at the portfolio level, and also our access into the DFIs and other global investors to attract capital.
Thank you. I'll come back to you later. Mr. Ken Sharpe, Chief Executive for WestProp Holdings. Question. WestProp's billion, I call it billionaire bricks, billion bricks vision as the redefined modern real estate in Zimbabwe, blending lifestyle, commerce, and community. You've been very successful. You have successfully delivered large-scale real estate projects in Zimbabwe. From your experience, what makes infrastructure and housing projects bankable in Zimbabwe's environment of high cost and policy uncertainty?
Thank you for that question. I would like to just start my remarks with 3 observations. The first one is, whilst me and you seem to be absolutely connected because you hadn't told me about that question until now, but it's exactly what I want to speak on. I don't think I got the note on the dress code because when I saw bankable, I was assuming I would be in the midst of bankers. So I dressed up like a banker. Normally I have my hard hat on and overcoat to build. And I see my banking brother here is in a golf shirt, as well as this beautiful audience in all these blue shirts. So next time, please send me the note. But the remark I'd like to make that's very serious is actually on the billion-dollar agricultural opportunity that was on the panel before us. Because I believe that $1 billion is a significant amount of money, anywhere you are in the world. $1 billion will get the attention of at least the president. Even President Trump will give attention to $1 billion. So $1 billion is a lot, but it's actually nothing compared to the opportunity I'm going to give you in real estate. I remember this very round table, maybe 10 years back. Chairman Bin, I don't know where you are. If I'm correct, please, if I'm not, please correct me. I remember this organization saying the economy in Zimbabwe is a $100 billion economy. Is that right? Everyone laughed at this organization. Today we are more than half of that. 100 billion is not where Zimbabwe needs to go. And the question we need to ask is not the question of the next generation, because I fully endorse Mutapa's philosophy as a company, WestProp. Our business is about the next generation. We are a multi-generational organization. We are building for the future of the country. In fact, our billion brick vision is premised on the fact that by 2050 we'll realize value of real estate just as one company of between 30 and 50 billion US dollars. That has a major macroeconomic effect on the whole country. So we are investing in tomorrow's generation. But I don't want to talk about that because it's too long to wait. And unlike our big brothers at Mutapa, with all respect to Ernest, who's in charge of the investments, and Doc John there, I think it's a huge animal running the country's resources. It's too big for me. In our sector, real estate, we are focused just on one thing, the billion bricks. And that makes our life a lot easier. But what we've realized at WestProp, and by the way, my brother chairing this panel, thank you so much for the comment of billionaire bricks. It's the first time I've heard the term, but I will use it, I will claim it. Because it's not only about 1 billion bricks, it's about the value that those billion bricks give. And this topic today is about unlocking those bankable opportunities. The value of 1 billion bricks, a brick is about 14 cents, by the way. Our bricks, our cement bricks, clay bricks, 12 cents. So between 120, 140 million US dollars, you could say that's the cost of bricks, which are all locally available in Zimbabwe. Cement would be a next component in the brick mix because you have to use mortar. And once you have bricks and mortar, you can put up a house. You can even plaster it. You need a roof. It could be a cement roof, but typically it will be a tiled roof. You need some timber, and you need a bit of paint, and then you've got a house. So it's not a difficult thing. But the value that 140 million US dollars brings in today's economy is 5 billion. So 140 million US dollars of bricks creates 5 billion US dollars of property, almost 50 times. And in the economy of 2050, we're talking of 30 to 50 billion because of the value equation, price increases, inflation, and so on and so forth. So we are certain that on our land banks, we've calculated we need 1 billion bricks to build out the developments we're building. We are certain that we are creating as an organization tens of billions of US dollars of value. But my conundrum is not in that. It's in how to unlock the capital. And recently I was reading a book by Bernardo de Soto, The Mystery of Capital. And it's a very interesting book. He wrote it a long time ago. It was revised in 2000. But it talks about the relevance today of our marketplace, especially in Zimbabwe. It applies to the whole continent, by the way. But he's saying that the assets, particularly the real estate assets owned by the poor in the world in 2000 was 9.5 trillion US dollars. In today's value, it's between 20 and 25 trillion US dollars. If that value of capital could be unlocked In fact, if only 10% of that value, or even 5%, let's take a trillion US dollars, 5% of the current value of real estate. If you could unlock 5% of that value, 1 trillion US dollars, just the return on that at 10% a year creates $100 billion a year. That is the required amount of money to eradicate poverty from this continent, entirely, forever. That means that the poor, that we think of being poor, actually hold the assets to make themselves unpoor, to remove them from poverty. So what is the problem we have? You see, even the value of the savings they estimated in the world today is about 55 times the size of all foreign aid received since 1945. Let me say that again. Since 1945 to date, the total value of foreign aid received in the world is 55 times less than the assets of the poor. It's mind-boggling. Let's turn the page to Zimbabwe because you wanted us to talk about local. In Zimbabwe today, we have 1 million homes, residential homes, that are titled. I'm not talking of illegal structures. We have another 3 million homes that are unregularized, that are in the process of getting regularized and titled issued. Let's take the titled properties, 1 million. At $100,000 per home, that is 100 billion US dollars. Where's the problem? The problem is our mind to start with, because we're not looking in the place where the money is. We're looking elsewhere, outside. We're trying to bring in foreign capital. FDI is great. The DFIs have to come back. There needs to be regularization with World Bank and the arrears. All those things must happen. But in the meantime, the money is right here. And it's not in resources that take decades to unlock. And unfortunately, when there's an investment in agriculture or in mining, it only goes into that sector. It doesn't filter down the whole economy. But with mortgages, in America, for example, they've proven that in America, the single most important thing in funding a new business is a mortgage on that entrepreneur's home. Because if I own a business, let's say I'm in Koadzana, and I have a $40,000 house. If I have a business that needs $20,000 capital, which is 50% value of my house, today I cannot access that mortgage. But if I could access that mortgage and get $20,000, even at 20% interest a year, which is very high, I know I will make enough profit every month to repay the mortgage, to service the loan, and to have enough working capital in my business that I can be productive and make a profit. When you multiply that into the economy, for every dollar of mortgages, we produce $3 of economic activity. And my surmise is on a $100 billion asset today, we should have at least 20% mortgages. It's very low, in fact. The world average is 50 to 60% of the property market. In fact, Switzerland, Europe's most expensive and most developed, I would say, economy, the wealthiest country in Europe, Switzerland, $1 trillion GDP, has $1.5 trillion of mortgages, 150% of their GDP. And in Africa, we're talking of, give us 20% of the home market, or 30 or 40% of GDP. It's 20 billion. Either way you cut it up, it's 20 billion in Zimbabwe. That 20 billion creates 60 billion GDP within a few years. So the question is, how do we unlock capital? And in the words of De Soto, he says the major stumbling block that keeps the rest of the world from benefiting from capitalism is its inability to produce capital. Capital is the force that raises the productivity of labor and creates the wealth of nations. It's the lifeblood of the capitalist system. The creation of securities like mortgage-backed funds that can be discounted and sold in secondary markets. Today at WestProp, we have a mortgage book that is bigger than any banks in Zimbabwe. It is almost 30 million US dollars. But I cannot go to any single financial institution in Zimbabwe and discount that book to relieve the cash that I can access from my own book. So I'm going to continue growing to the book 100 million, 200 million. That I'm not a bank, but I have no option. Because at the moment, we've not found a way of giving long-term tenure to the USD, which is another topic. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But this representational process, the West injects life into assets and makes them generate the capital needed. You see, we need to understand that the only way we can unlock bankable value is by unlocking the vast amount of unused capital and assets we have in Zimbabwe and Africa today. We must learn how to unlock that capital from the vast trillions of dollars that we're sitting on, and then we'll solve our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Still on you. You have really brought up a very important subject for equity release on property as a source of capital. In your own opinion, what are the limitations? Why can't we release that equity? What is stopping Zimbabwe utilizing that capacity held in properties?
I think there are two things. The first is policy inconsistency. We have to recognize the fact that the 1 million properties that I've talked about is only a quarter of the total properties in Zimbabwe. There are 3 million currently that don't have title deeds. We need to see that there's a conducive system, a framework that government creates, from the left hand to the right, to the far right hand, a holistic ecosystem where our focus is on how do we unlock value. It doesn't only apply to urban land, by the way, it also applies to farmland. And we've heard of the recent titles that have been promoted by government. I've not yet seen the practicality of how it's going to work, but I'm hopeful that if they are able to achieve that, it unlocks for the first time for small-scale farmers the ability to borrow against their land. So for me, the first thing is we need, as an organization, as CEO Africa Roundtable, as a member, I'm lobbying the members to come together, to stand together, because as an industry, when we have 500 or 600 members, I think, Chairman, is that right, approximately? 500 or 600 leaders of business, when we stand together with one voice, government listens. Any president in the world, any government in the world, when you have the leaders of the country, the business leaders talking with one voice, government listens. So I'm advocating that we stand together to say to government, let's unlock value from our assets. Not long-term assets of mining and agriculture that take decades, but immediate assets that we have available now. Those homes are built. They're titled 1 million homes. There's $100 billion today. Let's have the bankers come alongside us and say, yes, we can facilitate. We don't have the capital. We know the banks don't have the capital, but they can facilitate the capital to come in. However, we need to understand where the long-term tenure of the US dollar is going. Because even if government was to say the 2030 deadline, we're extending, for how long are they extending? All it does is put the expiry date later. If they say, no, we can't extend, we're going into ZIG, where is the ZIG coming from? Because we need 20 to 30 billion. They haven't even got $1 billion yet. So where are they going to create that ZIG? Are they going to print it and create more inflation? No, it's impossible. Therefore, we have to allow US dollars to come in to fund the mortgages. If we don't, we're restricting ourselves. We are not growing our economy into an upper middle class society. So I think for me, it's about saying, let's have consistency. If we extend it indefinitely, then there's a possibility that people can repay their mortgages in USD. If it's not extended until at least the 30-year mortgage expires, whoever's the lender is going to say, hang on a second. You can say my agreement is valid because I signed it today. It will be valid for 30 years. But the person that's repaying me, how is he going to find the US dollars? So I think we have to be realistic. We have to accept and admit what it is that we're dealing with. Let's be honest with each other. Let's have an honest discussion.
Thank you. Let me move to the regional or continental context. And our focus is on financing and investment mechanisms. Mr. Sachikonye, my question. AFREXIMBANK has been instrumental in de-risking trade and investment across Africa. How is the bank leveraging project preparations, blended finance, or guarantee instruments to make African projects more attractive to investors. You know, your institutions is on record to say you are sitting on tons of capital, but you lack bankable opportunities. Please, check your time.
Thank you, Elias, and good morning to everyone. Happy to be here, and congratulations to CEO Roundtable for this conference. So as AFREXIMBANK, we are now 32 years old, having been formed in 1993. I think if I start off by spelling out our mandate, it will become easier for people to understand where we are coming from. So our mandate is to facilitate, finance, and promote intra-African trade, extra-African trade, as well as trade-enabling infrastructure. We are a bank which is owned by 53 out of the 54 African countries. We have got private investors, so we are truly public-private partnership, which is successful on the continent because we've got private investors. And now we also have got 12 out of the 15 Caribbean community countries as our members. Zimbabwe is a founding shareholder in the bank, and it was the first branch out of the headquarters to be established. Our headquarters is in Cairo, so the first branch outside the head office was Harare in 1997. So we've been in this market since 1997. And it will be pleasing to note that since then we have pumped almost $12 billion into this market alone.
Wow.
Thank you. And from here we manage 13 countries because we are the regional center for Southern Africa. And then we've got 6 regional centers across, and the 6th one was formed in Barbados in August 2023. We are $40 billion, over $40 billion bank, and to any single borrower we can give up to $1.7, $1.8 billion. We have access to capital. The challenge that we face, like you rightly pointed out, there is so much money chasing very few bankable projects. Yet you have got so many projects that are looking for money. Every day my job is to receive applications, review them, and recommend them. But I can tell you, on a single day, more than 90% of the projects that I receive are not yet bankable.
Hey.
That is the challenge that we have. With that realization as a bank, we then said we need to bridge the gap. So some years back, we formed a unit which is called Project Preparation Unit. The role is to bring the projects to bankability, to bankable stage. So one can do their pre-feasibility study, and then they can bring the project to us, and then the team will do full feasibility study. Technical due diligence, legal due diligence, financial modeling, commercial due diligence, environmental due diligence, insurance due diligence, to ensure that all the facets of the project are taken care of and the project is now bankable. Added to that, when we do project preparation, we also put a condition for us to be given the first right of refusal to finance that project, because we have done it, so we can actually finance that project as well through senior debt.
Wow.
You can go wherever you want. That's why we're saying first right of refusal. So we can do it and you can go and borrow elsewhere, but we would want to participate in that as well because we're there to support our own member states.
Yeah.
So far, we have supported projects worth over, just through that unit only, projects worth over 10.5 billion over the continent. And in Zimbabwe, you might have seen it in the newspapers, a couple of months back, we actually signed a joint preparation, project preparation facility in the energy sector. Because of that realization that we need to bring the projects, we need to close the energy gap in Africa and in Zimbabwe as well. So we're actually working on that. It is estimated, Elias, that by the Global Impact Investment Network, that there's about $1.2 trillion out there from impact investors that is looking for a home. And the challenge that they have is sometimes lack of trust. Earlier on, there was a discussion of trust. Lack of partners that will link those impact investors to the private sector, to governments, and ensure that what they are investing in is not a bottomless pit. Their money will come back. Every investor wants to get their money back. And this is in the form of multilateral development banks. You have got rich families, foundations, trust. You have got the institutional investors, your pension funds, your insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds around the world. The funds are there. They're looking for a home. But what they need are credible partners. And I'm happy to advise that as a bank, we've built that reputation on the continent as a reputable partner, and as well as our convening power. And we work with other multilateral development banks around the world. And we've got lines from some of these countries like India, China, Japan, and we're even raising bonds. We even raised a panda bond in China, a Yamura bond in Japan, and we are going out there to access funds. But my brother Ken said something very important earlier on. Before you talk about foreign direct investment, I always believe in local investment. Yes. As a local investor, before I go out to look for foreign investors, where are we investing our money as locals? So we need to attract local investment. It is estimated that over 30% of Africa's financial resources are held offshore. What pains us is that money comes back to Africa. We go out there as AFREXIMBANK to raise money, and we are given those African resources back into the continent. Yeah. When they take their money, when we send their money out there, they take it and give us, take it for a song. But when we want that money back to invest, they say Africa is risky. But these are our resources, that's where the money goes. Right? And it is estimated that we lose, as Africa, over $14 billion per annum in tax revenue because we are keeping our funds offshore. So what we did as a bank is we then started we started with central banks. We called it Central Deposit Scheme, CENDEP. What we said to central banks is, central banks, why are you keeping your funds offshore? Those $1 billion that you're keeping offshore, keep them with us on the continent. Then we can deploy them into the continent at reasonable interest rates. Because when I go out there, it's expensive. They say Africa is risky, yet they're depending on our resources. So that has been successful, but we still need to do more. To date, we have raised more than $44 billion out of that initiative. Yes. Thank you. And in Zimbabwe, we do have quite a number of, so we then extended it to private companies and banks. So we do have banks in Zimbabwe today that are investing with us. The beauty is you go out there, they give you 2%, but we'll give you double that. Okay. You get a better return, and the money is on the continent, and then that money is deployed into the continent. It's estimated between 250 billion, 500 billion of African financial resources is offshore. Let's keep the money on the continent and develop our own continent. And then you spoke about de-risking. So we do have a preferred creditor status in our member states. So a country has to ratify our agreement through an act of parliament, and then we are given preferred creditor status. Using that preferred creditor status, we can then guarantee people that want to invest in the continent, but they think it's too risky. So we then come in and then guarantee. Yes, as Zimbabwe is a founding shareholder, so we've got preferred creditor status, so we can actually issue guarantees to risk wrap some of the projects, some of the investors coming onto the continent. So we do that quite a lot, and we've done in a number of countries on the continent, including Zimbabwe. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sachikonye. I'm holding back some of my questions, but I was enjoying the discussion. Can I move on to transnational or global context? where we are now focusing on positioning Africa within the global investments architecture, connecting capital, culture, and confidence. Mr. Werner Trieloff, Senior Representative of Africa, Afro Chamber, Brazil. My question. From a Latin American perspective, why Zimbabwe? And why now? How is the Afro Chamber Brazil working to connect the Southern Hemisphere economies through trade, investment, and innovation corridors? What unique advantages does Africa present to global investors, in your view?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity again. Excellent question. And a bit of history, I think, before I go into answering that. As Afro Chamber, I had the pleasure and the honor of visiting more than 16 African countries in the last year and a half. From the northeast, Senegal, Ivory Coast to the northwest, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, South Africa, Mozambique, etc. And that together with the Brazilian government and some Brazilian business people. Africa for many, many years was always the potential, the continent. There was opportunity. China saw that before, and China brought capital, but no knowledge transfer. They invested, they brought their development and their assistance, but from there took out the results again afterwards. The other countries were looking at Africa for many, many years as well. But now for the last 2, 3, 4 years, people are putting their money where their mouth is. So if you only look at recent developments, the Qatari family fund that invested $103 billion in 6 African countries. The Ghana 24-hour economy project, where the African Development Bank signed the LOU or LOI for $4 billion investment. The Brazilian and Nigerian agreement with the Green Initiative, with also, I think, $2 billion being invested, 10,000 tractors, 50,000 implements being sent through. The potential is now being turned into reality. But from the conversation that we had before as well, and to the conversation now, together with those funds, you need governance. The money just doesn't go and magically turns into results or commodities. There need to be governance and there need to be security in policies, in implication of those funds. As my colleague mentioned earlier, there's a lot of projects and there's a lot of capital, but if there's no governance, if there's no offtake, it doesn't help. I had a conversation with the agricultural bank in Nigeria, where there's a reasonably large project, and his first question, the CEO of the bank, was, the project looks amazing, but where's the offtake? It doesn't help you produce something amazing, but there's no sale afterwards. So, from a Latin American perspective, there's a very, very big interest in Africa, not just Zimbabwe, but a lot of other African countries, because we see, and not just in the agricultural sector, in the energy sector, we realize that that is the future of the world. And from a Brazilian perspective, I can say, I've spoken to a number of Brazilian business people, banks, investors, etc. Again, the focus is not just on selling a commodity and leaving. The focus is on knowledge transfer. The focus is on building local production. I'm going to give a couple of examples of that. JBS, one of the biggest Brazilian producers of meat, is investing, I think, about $2.5 billion in Nigeria to build 6 factories. I think 3 meat, 2 poultry, and 1 pork. So that's not just selling the commodity. It's actually going and creating local production. There's examples of a Brazilian farmer that created a corporation called Fertile Africa. They've bought, I think they're roughly about 2 million hectares already across Africa, where they are producing locally in Africa in order to supply the local demand. So there's examples of where investors and companies are coming over, and again, not just looking at where they can take something and leave, but where they can leave a mark and help build locally. So that's what we've seen over the last couple of years, and I think that is going to be increase going forward, again, across Africa.
Thank you. I'm not going to check the next question with you in the interest of time. Mr. Tendai Watyoka, Wiise Wealth Builders, USA. We are talking about entrepreneurship and wealth creation. Your focus is on building wealth and scalable enterprises. What are the key ingredients that turn small ideas into bankable, investment-ready ventures?
Thank you. Yeah, so I've privileged to have both experience as a Zimbabwean and also as an American kind of. So I'm going to come up with a structured solution in regard to that. So first, what I've noted is that there's need for mindset shift. As alluded before by Mr. Sachikonye, that we are sitting on brilliant ideas, but ideas alone is not adequate. We need to test those ideas so that they become validated. When they're validated, they become an opportunity. What am I talking about here? I'm saying we have to come up with a way and change the way we do things. I call it controlled disruption. For example, we have lithium here in Zimbabwe. We know what it does in EV and what Elon Musk is doing in the USA wave stay. Why not attract a Silicon Valley of our Zimbabwean? When we have that, generally it attracts value. Investors are not philanthropists. They want return on investment. So, but generally, value attracts funding. So when they see that we are going to create, let's say, a lithium hub for Zimbabwe, and we're going to be, I call it creating blue oceans. Blue oceans is a model where we are creating a totally new market. Whosoever is going to come before, after us, is a rival competitor. So once we have systems and structures in place, generally you're going to find that funding naturally comes. But in order to do that, we have to change the way we do things. That's why I said controlled disruption. So when we do that, you're going to find that naturally and automatically we change that into bankable opportunities.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to our last but not least, Mr. Robert Johnson, Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce, USA. Focus on diaspora and global linkages. The African diaspora in the USA represents both capital and expertise. How can diaspora investors be mobilized into structured, scalable investment vehicles for Africa?
Thank you. On behalf of Dr. Larry Ivory and the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce and his role as national president of the Black Chamber of Commerce, I bring you greetings. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm the managing partner of the Solomon Group, which is a social impact management consulting firm and law firm in Chicago. And I want to talk to you about the opportunity that I see with respect to what I will call cultural economic arbitrage, which is very similar to what the last panelist talked about in terms of how we can build partnerships and bridges between African Americans and the African diaspora. So as I said, it's an honor to stand before you, leaders who carry the weight and promise of a continent whose time has come. I want to thank the CEO Africa Roundtable for convening this extraordinary gathering and for the courage to host conversations that go beyond borders, beyond business, and into the deeper question of what we owe to one another as people of African descent. I come before you not only as a lawyer and entrepreneur from the United States, but as a son of Africa's scattered children, a descendant of those who were taken, yet who never forgot. For generations, we have looked across the Atlantic with longing and respect, knowing that our destinies remain bound together. Today, we're being called to do something our ancestors can only dream of, to rebuild the bridge between Africa and her diaspora, not with words of sorrow, but with strategies of empowerment. For centuries, the distance between African and African Americans has been more than physical. It has been a silence imposed by history, distorted by media, and manipulated by systems that profited from our separation. But something powerful is arising. Across the world, Africa is rising, young, vibrant, rich in natural resources, human capital, and cultural influence. At the same time, African Americans are awakening, realizing that our wealth, networks, and skills can no longer remain isolated in Western markets. Technology has erased the excuses that geography once offered. The question is no longer if we should connect, but how we will partner and how fast. The African continent holds the world's youngest population and some of the fastest growing economies. By 2050, 1 in every 4 people on this planet will be African. Meanwhile, in the United States, African Americans command over $2 trillion in annual purchasing power and control a growing basis of business, capital, and institutional influence. Imagine what becomes possible when these two forces align, when African innovation meets African American capital, when African natural resources meet diaspora technology and expertise, when our shared identity becomes our investment thesis. This is not charity, this is strategy. It is the recognition that we can no longer build wealth in isolation while other empires gain on our disconnection. There are sectors ready for partnership today: infrastructure, renewable energy, digital technology, healthcare, education, real estate, and creative industries. Each of these represents a gateway of our shared prosperity. If we're bold enough to cross it together. True partnership, however, is not built only on money. It is built on trust, understanding, and respect. We must be honest about the skepticism that sometimes exists on both sides. Some Africans wonder whether diaspora truly understands the complexity of doing business here. Some African Americans question whether the systems in Africa are ready for transparent collaboration. Both questions are valid, but neither can be allowed to define our relationship. Instead, we must redefine partnership through mutual value. Africans bring opportunity, access, and market insight. African Americans bring networks, global capital, advocacy, power. Together, we bring credibility, the ability to speak both the language and culture and the language of capital, social and cultural dimensions. Beyond economics lies something deeper, the restoration of identity. When we collaborate, we don't just build companies, we build a narrative that was stolen from us. Every joint venture, every trade mission, every exchange of idea becomes an act of reclamation. So having said that, Illinois has roughly about $63 billion worth of buying power just alone by African Americans. African American median income in the United States is roughly around $54,000 to $59,000 a year. That holds tremendous opportunity for African Americans to do business in Africa. Based upon the geopolitical issues that are going on in my country, there are more of us that want to do business with Africans. There are more of us that want to come home. So there is an opportunity for us to, as I said, engage in cultural, economic arbitrage and work together to build partnerships based on structure, based on credibility, based on trust, and a shared history of oppression. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me open the floor for questions. I'm skipping a number of things. So if I can go through. At the front, you can go ahead, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. Scale, I want you colleagues to comment on scale. Scale is very important when you say bankability, when you say return on investment, when you say opportunity, when you say financial viability. Scale is a major driver. What do I mean? We need to think regional, SADC, regional, ECOWAS, regional, East African community, but most importantly, the African continent. Why don't we push regional projects? Why don't we push continental projects? For example, Inga Dam. What do we need to do to get that funded and taken off? Because if we do Inga Dam, we'll be able to provide energy for the continent. Scale, can we have some views on scale? Last point, Mutapa. I want to ban a phrase in your language. I want to ban a phrase in this country. I want to ban a phrase in the continent. What is that phrase? Mine to port strategy. Mine to port strategy. Why do you want to do that? We want mine to factory strategy, then to port. Never, ever again should I hear the phrase in Africa, mine to port strategy. We don't want it. We want our minerals to go from the mine to the factory so we can do value addition and beneficiation. Then we consume our own products, and thereafter we can go to the port. Mine to port strategy is banned.
Do you want to respond? Thank you, Professor.
So I can,
And the emphasis is good.
I can take the question on scale.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you can come in.
Can I just make one quick comment? I had it was mentioned earlier as well, why African countries do not speak to each other. And in that sense, I actually want to thank our US counterpart. The Trump actions over the last couple of months has created a lot of complications and a lot of issues across the globe. But it has also brought a lot of benefits, where now countries are speaking to each other. Because previously everybody was always looking at the US, buy my product, do this, bring us aid. I had a situation in Kenya where I think it was Kenyan flowers or Nigerian flowers, but it's flowers that are created or produced, sent up to Holland and exported to Nigeria.
Yeah.
Why? But that was only seen and addressed after tariffs and things were brought in. So that is something that I'm noticing over my business travels, is that Africa is speaking to Africa again.
Yeah.
And that can lead to many more opportunities going forward.
Yeah.
And ties into the fact of producing locally, not just sending to a port and exporting to Europe or to America.
Thank you. Africa is a very big market, but we are too fragmented. We can't consolidate ourselves. Mutapa.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, it's interesting to hear, certain things being banned. But here's what I can say. When we talk to mine to port strategy, it is not only mined products that phrase referred to. And I can give you a specific example. I think we're talking of Africa needs electricity for about 600 million people. When we look at our lithium industry, it had to start at a certain stage. I think Ministry of Mines has made certain progress on restricting lithium ore sales and going, let's produce lithium concentrate as a first base, right? We will still be exporting lithium concentrate. The next stage is carbonate hydroxide. To do that, you need to solve the power energy deficit. But even if you look at the steel industry itself, right, we endowed with the chrome, we endowed with limestone, we've got the iron ore, so yes, you can produce steel. What can you do with the steel? Yes, you could probably export it, or you could do other things and put it out into the region. The reality is the infrastructure, the logistics, whether you then want to export finished products or it's unbeneficiated products, you need that solution. So probably when people refer to mine to port, it is not essentially just about ores being shipped out. The reality is, even when we're speaking to guys like DP World, who are building port infrastructure around Africa, you need to balance the trade. What you export out, you need to import back in one way or the other. I entirely agree. We're looking at statistics for just China alone. 2024, Africa imported goods worth $180 billion from China. We exported what we could call unfinished products worth about 116 billion. So the trade deficit gap was $60 billion. That is clearly unsustainable. And we need to be beneficiating stuff in Africa so that we are in balance of payments surplus. So that strategy is mid-long term. We cannot solve structural deficits around infrastructure, which is a key funding requirement, without being realistic to say mid-short term, we still need to export lithium concentrate. Now, how do you export the lithium concentrate without the logistics infrastructure? So that's the conundrum, and the reality is, if we ban it, as we're suggesting, we don't have the power to produce the carbonate and the hydroxide. So what becomes the solution? So I think it needs to be a balanced conversation of a gradual phase out to reach the beneficiation that allows us to be exporting finished products and compete with developed countries that already have the technologies. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me lead on from there where my brother Ernest was, and that is that timing is everything. The Bible says there's a time and season for everything, Professor Mutambara. So my answer to your question about scale is that it is impossible to scale outside of something that you've already proved the concept for, because you will fail. You first need to have proof of concept. You need to refine that process so that it becomes perfected. And once you're confident that in that micro ecosystem you've perfected that process, then you can start to replicate and scale outside of there. In context of WestProp, we specifically identified Harare as the first place to scale, because it would be pointless for us to scale nationally if we failed in Harare. So today I'm proud to say at 90 million bricks, 9% of the billion brick vision, we've scaled where we currently have 9 simultaneous projects under construction in Harare. We're adding 6 more next year. And we're now confident that we can start to replicate that process outside. So for the first time, we're now looking outside Harare at other towns. Once we have covered some other towns, then potentially we could look at regionally. But it would be ridiculous for us to go regionally now before we've actually proven what we can do at home. And the other thing about scale is that we can consider ourselves small as a country in the global context, GDP-wise, population-wise, and small even in the African context. There are much bigger markets in COMESA and SADC and the continent. However, the market availability today in Zimbabwe is over 1 million homes, because there's a waiting list of over 1 million people wanting homes. We as a company are only supplying 25,000 of those homes. Currently, on our billion brick vision, it's only 25,000 homes. It's a very small number. So there's no point in us to scale outside of the country when we haven't met the demand inside the country.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sharpe. You wanted to add something just quickly and wrapping up?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to address the question on scale. I think earlier on I spoke about, okay, or did I? Lack of intra-African trade is due to 3 major reasons. One is lack of capital, which I've spoken about. The other one is lack of access to information. The other one is poor infrastructure. What are we doing as a bank? In terms of infrastructure, when you look at the infrastructure that we have, the masters of yesteryear years put infrastructure that promotes pit to port, which is a dirty word now, Professor. I agree with you, pit to port. Maybe mine is different because maybe you would have beneficiated, but pit to port is really a dirty word on the continent. So what we are doing is to ensure that we capacitate the countries in terms of free movement, easy movement of goods between countries. So we are upgrading a border post across the continent. Closer home, we co-finance by border post. We upgraded, I'm sure, I hope we're enjoying crossing into South Africa. And we are also looking at other border posts around. We are talking to regional railways companies on the continent, particularly in the region. From here, Southern Africa, we are talking to the local one, Botswana Railways, Transnet in South Africa, CFM in Mozambique, Eswatini Railways, in terms of connecting the railway system so that there's intra-African trade. And then we also have got what we call, lastly, the Africa Transit Guarantee. When you move from one border to another, you need a customs bond. Now, Cape to Cairo, how many borders are you going to cross? Not even to Cairo, from South Africa to DRC. So we now have got a one bond that we introduced. Through that one bond, you can cross all the borders using one bond into the different countries, just through one bond. And we work with local tax authorities and local insurance companies to ensure that there's free movement, easy movement of goods across the continent.